Hello people, this is Socrates San. In this video, I will refute the kind of cosmological argument Mohammed Hijab made in his interview with Jordan Peterson. And then maybe I will do some other videos responding to the other things they discussed, which are more important. But for the time being, let's refute these cosmological arguments.
Well, the first thing is I think we should start with the bare bones basics. And the bare bones basics is first to say that we believe in God. And the kind of God we believe in is one God worthy of worship. In fact, the Quran makes a series of arguments, rational arguments for why we believe in the type of God that we believe in. For example, in chapter 52, verse 35 of the Quran, it says, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ أَمْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Were they created from nothing or by nothing? Or were they themselves the creators of themselves? Did they create the heavens and the earth? They have no certainty. In other words, the Quran is hinting here at the fact that it's impossible for something to come from nothing. And it's impossible also for something to give rise to itself. And so the universe, for example, if we take this as an example, couldn't have come from nothing, and it couldn't have created itself. It couldn't be self-generating and or self-maintaining.
The primitive and philosophically inadequate people who wrote the Quran, even in their simplistic language that Mohammed Hijab found it significance, they made a false dichotomy. They say the universe, either it came from nothing, either it created itself. There is a third option. The cosmos always existed that gave birth to our current universe. Of course, that's not surprising, as Allah in the Quran makes the most silly arguments ever, proving, of course, the Quran cannot possibly be from God, as God should have been intelligent.
And there can't be a world, in fact, the Quran would indicate, there cannot be a world with only dependent things, things that require other things in order to exist ad infinitum. And so what is required outside of the series of dependent things is something which is independent, which all things depend upon, and which itself depends upon nothing. And this is what the Quran refers to as as-samad, or the idea of God being self-sufficient and independent. So the idea of God.
So it's a prime move. It's a prime mover argument, and you think
it's a kind of prime mover argument. A lot of.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that the same argument that you put forward in relationship to the generation of the universe can't be put forward as an objection in relationship to God? You know, because you make a logical case that something can't come from nothing and something can't create itself, but you from a philosophical perspective. This isn't a religious critique. From a philosophical perspective, you just move the problem back one step. What advantages do you think there are to moving the problem back one step, or am I mischaracterizing it?
Well, I'll tell you what, Dr. Jordan Peterson, what you said is very similar to what Richard Dawkins said in a debate with the Archbishop of the then Archbishop of Canterbury. And he said that, well, if you have, and he said this debate, he made this argument in Oxford. And he said that if you look at the universe, well, if you're saying that God has made the universe in this way, then your God, who's more complicated, and he would add this layer of complexity.
Yes.
Your God who's more complicated would require an even greater. He would require an even greater explanation.
Really a greater God.
Yeah. So really interestingly, Anthony Kenny, who's an agnostic himself, he's a philosopher and agnostic. He came in and he said, well, actually, take a look at this. You've got an electric razor, which is made up of many different component parts. And you have a cutthroat razor, which is made up of one part. And he said, although the electric razor is more complicated, it serves less functions than the cutthroat razor, because the cutthroat razor can cut your throat and it can also cut an apple, for example. And so it's a fallacy to assume that just because something is complicated or that something has many features and attributes, that thing itself requires an explanation.
The electric razor and the cutthroat razor analogy is a false analogy because both are used by humans. So, although divine simplicity makes sense in theology, this is how primates conceptualize their God in popular religious mythology. God must do everything. they say, at the same time cannot be undermined by anything that is befitting to His Majesty. Any kind of parts or structure in the essence of God undermines the God primates conceptualize. It makes sense in the human mind to take a human, imagine all his attributes to the extreme, and all the things that can undermine God to zero, and name that God. That is exactly how the human mind works. Extreme zero, extreme zero. So, gods or God in popular human mythology is a reflection of our mind, not of reality. Not realizing, of course, that with that way we make the probability of that God to exist in reality to zero. What is probable? Difficulty of the task divided by the means we have to achieve this task. Or in a person, qualities divided by structure. God has eternal qualities, at the same time He cannot be undermined by any structure, therefore eternally improbable, therefore impossible. Let me give you an analogy. What is the probability Usain Bolt doing 100 meters in 11 seconds? Very probable. I think he already did that. What if now Usain Bolt needed to do eternal meters in 0 seconds? At the same time, let's cut him his feet. What is the probability now? Usain Bolt to do that? 0. Okay. So, because the human mind, wants God to be ultimate, majestic, what it's doing, it's conceptualize God doing everything, but at the same time cannot be undermined by anything. In that sense, we made God totally improbable. Moreover, if you agree, if you begin your argument that you need a hand to be the prime mover for the universe, how you then deny that we need function for qualities? It's the same concept. You idiot. Sorry, I will try to rephrase myself because that's a serious video. But it's the same concept, my friend. So how you deny? First you accept that you need a prime mover, and then you deny that you need structure for qualities. It's exactly the same concept.
And in fact, if we had an infinite regress of such explanations, then obviously that would lead to a kind of absurdity. So even well-meaning atheists and agnostics in the field realize the redundancy and the fallacy and the argument that is put forward by the likes of Richard Dawkins, who said that kind of thing. And I would also add to that one point: the argument from composition, which is usually a corollary to the contingency argument, usually is made in the following way: that everything that is made of parts is contingent, that the universe, or say a multiverse, is made of parts, therefore a universe, or the universe and or the multiverse, is contingent. The parts that we're talking about mereologically here are things that can be attached and detached. So that doesn't apply to God. Classical theism doesn't say that God is made of parts the same way as human beings are, or as universes are, or multiverses are. And in fact, the Quran hints at this itself. It says, الَّذِي خَلَقَكَ فَسَوَّاكَ فَعَدَلَكَ فِي أَيِّ صُورَةٍ مَا شَاءَ رَكَّبَكَ. That the one who created you and composed you and configured you in any form that He wished, He put you together. And so the fact that you have such configuration in the universe indicates to the fact that you have an external sorting agent that has particularized the universe in a certain way, and that has composed the universe in a certain way. So the argument really is that things which are made of attachable and detachable parts, that those things are contingent. That doesn't apply to God on any theistic paradigm.
That is the special pleading logical fallacy. The cosmological argument refers to cosmology. Yet you are using theological descriptions as part of this argument, when in fact you need to investigate the probability of your concept of God existing in cosmology. Let's do that. You claim a being always existed outside of any environment, having all these convenient qualities and specified this descriptive or distinctive character. At the same time, this being having no structure inside his essence that can account for these qualities and specified characteristics of character, including, for example, specific political views in the case of Islam. That in cosmology signifies literally the extreme end of improbability. Okay, so what you like us to believe is that there is a being with consciousness that exists outside of all environments. First of all, consciousness doesn't make sense outside of all environments. Everything that defines consciousness is a reflection of some environment. I love who I love, a person. I dream what I dream, trees, the sun. Everything that defines consciousness is a reflection of the environment. Moreover, consciousness implies causation. First I act and then I decide. So consciousness implies some kind of linear time environment with causality. But you like us to believe that this consciousness exists outside of any and all environments, at the same time existed forever. Imagine how insane that is. Hello, I just exist forever. Why? I just exist forever without any explanation. Moreover, I do all these convenient things without having something in me to support these things. I need to be one unified thing. Yet I can do everything. At the same time, I have specific character. How probable is something always existing having specific character? How probable that is? So, even in the contingency argument that you like to bring up, what is the necessary being? What are the characteristics of the necessary being? Always existed and could not have been any other way. So wait just a moment. All these peculiar, specified characteristics of Allah could not have been any other way. Why? In cosmology, I mean. Why? God could not have not been a communist. He could not have been a capitalist, let's say. God needed to love people having fabrics in their hair. It could not have been any other way. God necessarily needs to have a chin or a leg, as in the Quran. God necessarily needed to love Mohammed. And you see, that doesn't make sense. So maybe in your theology that makes sense, but in cosmology that doesn't make sense. That makes this concept of God the extreme end of improbability.
Now, what we would say, though, sorry to kind of drag this on a little bit, is that this would disqualify something like the Trinity from being true. And in fact, the Quran, this is the Islamic position, is vehement in its opposition towards a triune God. So, for example, in chapter 23, verse 91, it says, مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وَلَدٍ وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِذًا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَا عَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. That God hasn't taken a son and he doesn't have any gods with him. If that had been the case, each God would have taken what he has created and they would have tried to dominate one another.
Yeah. In the beginning, you remember, guys, that I said that the Quran gives the most silly, outrageous arguments ever. Okay, that's one of them. Okay, in this passage, Mohammed Hijab is referring to, it says, how can God have a son without having a partner? That's the argument of God. He says, how can God have a son without having a partner? Okay, guys, I just woke up. The arguments of the Quran are ridiculous. Ridiculous. If we judge Allah from his arguments, he's a total moron. Not even 10-year-olds make arguments like Allah. Okay, so Trinity and two birds.
The idea, therefore, that there can be more than one all-powerful entity is an inconceivable and unintelligible idea from the Islamic paradigm. So it's seen as problematic, to say the least, or conceptually impossible, to say even more, to suggest that something like a Trinity can be true. When it's talking about, for example, Mary and Jesus, it says something very simple, that both of them used to eat food. So in other words, the impossibility.
That's another moronic argument in the Quran. Sorry. Look, the Quran says, why you consider Jesus God? When he was eating food. But Jesus was reincarnated. So what kind of argument? Allah, are you an 8-year-old? If you bring an 8-year-old now and say, give us an argument against the Trinity, he won't say, how Jesus was God when he was eating. Okay, this is the levels of the arguments in the Quran that these people find impressive. Yeah, it's total insanity. Okay, please continue.
Of something limited like Jesus, a man, being God at the same time, being unlimited, because the definition of God is that he's unlimited, is all powerful.
Do you think that there's a divine spark in human beings?
No, but we don't think there's any kind of divinity at all. Islam is categorical about this, because the way we define divinity is extremely strict. We say that the divine attributes of God are specific only to God.
Yet you describe God all loving. Humans have love also. So you describe God all merciful. Wait, humans have mercy. The entirely merciful. Isn't that right? So that is another theological error in Islamic theology that Christianity hasn't got. Islamic theology, although Muslims like to deny that usually, so every Muslim I debate denies that, what Mohammed Hijab just accepted, that in contradiction with Christianity that claims that humans are in the image of God. In Islam, God has nothing to do with humans, yet he is all loving, all merciful, entirely merciful, but is incomparable. That doesn't make sense. Another way Islamic theology fails.
So
what's the characteristic element of the human relationship with God? So and what's the central you say, structure of value within a human being that makes them worthy of respect, say, in the sight of God, or worthy of value in the sight of God?
The Quran states, لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have dignified the child of Adam. So that we do believe in something called human exceptionalism. We do believe that human being has been specialized or specified among all other things in creation to be to have free will, for example, to have a personal relationship with God, to have a loving relationship with God. People don't realize this, especially from the Christian tradition.
How can you have a loving relation with God when God hasn't got love, as you just admitted? Mohammed Hijab, you are lucky Jordan Peterson doesn't know about Islam, although he's a very intelligent person. Because if I was interviewing you, I would have ended your career every 5 seconds you talk. Not because you are not intelligent, but because Islamic theology fails every 5 seconds. That's the reason, Mohammed Hijab. But please continue.
But one of the names of God from the Islamic tradition is that he's the loving one, Al-Wadud in Arabic, in the Quran as well. So we believe that the relationship that human beings should have with God is a loving relationship, but It's one of submission. This is the main thing. Islam doesn't mean peace. Islam actually means submission. Islam comes from the root Arabic word istislam. And what it means is submission.
In other words, you just accepted what Muslims deny, that God hasn't got any love for humans. The relationship is of a slave to his master. Okay. God don't love humans, hasn't got any capacity to love. He hasn't got the personal relation of Jesus Christ with humans. So you dare compare your unloving, incapable to love, incapable of mercy, scaktro, name Allah, with the majesty of Jesus? You dare compare those two? Are you insane, my friend? And that coming from an atheist. Please, continue.
And really what the picture is in the Islamic cosmology is that everything in the universe is submitting to God. Everything, the laws of nature have been placed there by the lawmaker, which is God. And so we as human beings are volitional. We do believe in free will, but we also believe in a theological.
You liar. You don't believe in free will. You believe in determinism. Okay, you believe in destiny. The book of destiny. I would have put it now, your 54 hadiths that contradicts free will, your 54 Sahih hadiths that contradicts free will, but we don't have time for that. Mohammed Hijab, you cannot support your theology for more than 5 seconds. That is what's happening right now.
And so we as human beings are volitional. We do believe in free will, but we also believe in a theological compatibilism. And so that a kind of predetermination is actually one of our pillars of faith, to believe in that.
So you believe in free will and predetermination, both, like a kind of compatibilism. No, you don't believe in compatibilism, my friend. This is what you came up to excuse that you don't have free will. Okay, guys, there are 54 hadiths that go against compatibilism. It's clear-cut predestination. But then Muslim apologists like this guy, they try to philosophize out of this by concept of compatibilism and this kind of nonsense. But the Quran doesn't say, or the Hadith doesn't imply compatibilism. Mohammed Hijab. Islam is predestination. Clear cut.
So in that sense, we have to voluntarily submit to God in the same way that everything else in creation is.
And what does that submission mean?
What that means is that all the prophets and messengers came before time. So this is the meta-narrative of Islam. Abraham came, Moses came, Jesus came, and all of them came with exactly the same message. And that message is to worship, to believe in one God and to worship in only one God.
That claim is unhistorical. Okay, you cannot possibly imply that all the Bible, the entirety of the Bible that implies Jesus to be God and anticipates Jesus, and it's a revelation, an apocalyptic revelation that leads to Jesus. You cannot imply all this Bible was corrupted. And in fact, the Bible meant there is only one God in a sense of Islam. You cannot possibly support that historically or with reason. Okay, so no, not the previous Christianity didn't have the message of Islam by no stretch of the imagination. Okay, Islam is completely different than Christianity.
And to do that, you have to follow a guidance. So each and every single one of those messengers, they came with, we believe in our narrative, they came with two things effectively. They came with a message, which is to worship God, meaning to submit to his laws. and also with some kind of evidence base to suggest that they are prophets. So some of these stories would have been known, obviously, to you. You've done a biblical series, so I know you're very aware of those stories. We have very similar stories, like in Moses, Abraham, Jesus, but they are slightly different. Those stories are slightly different. In fact, sometimes radically different.
So, slightly or radically? Slightly or radically? Guys, without lies, Islam dies. That's the example. Slightly or radically? What is it? You cannot have it both. They have slight difference, sometimes radically. Of course it's radically, my friend. You take from each prophet his ultimate purpose. Jesus didn't come to save humanity. That is slightly. No, that's radically, my friend. You make Jesus from the Savior a complete failure. Jesus came to save humanity. Instead, he made most of human beings go to hell. That's not slightly. That's radically. Okay, but at least try, Mohammed Hijab, to speak and not contradict yourself after 3 seconds. This is what you need to achieve.
Especially considering some New Testament kind of narratives. And so what the thread that joins, or the flesh that joins all of these kind of messengers and prophets, is that they all came with one fundamental message, which is to believe in one God, worship one God. We believe that the Prophet Muhammad...
So hang on. I'm still not understanding this exactly.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you mean by believe. Like the way you laid that out was in some sense propositional. Right. You made a logical argument for the existence of God, but
yeah,
you take the existence of God as given in some sense to begin with because of your faith, and then you provide your belief with a rational argument, but it wasn't derived from a rational argument. And so when you talk about belief, do you mean belief in a set of propositions about the nature of God? And if you do or don't, what do you believe, and how would you separate out that belief from what you term as worship?
Right. So actually, there's one thing that ought to be known, that in Islamic theology, we believe in something called the fitrah, which is an innate instinct to believing in God. And now, I'm not sure if you're aware of the work on it.
So why bother with the propositional arguments then? To me, they just seem like a side venture, to argue with scientists.
Some scholars have said that in Islam. Sorry, I apologize.
Yeah. Okay. No.
In fact, some modern day philosophers of religion have that kind of a stance, like Alvin Plantinga. He seems quite, agnostic about the whole thing. I mean, the thing is, what we're saying is, it would be committing something like the naturalistic fallacy to suggest that just because something is the case, or there is ought fallacy maybe, just because something is the case, that it ought to be the case. So in order to prove it's a demonstrative proof for those who are in what we call shak or doubt. And but the truth is, as you've mentioned, and as in the literature, like for example, Justin Barrett has this in his cognitive psychological or cognitive science literature. I'm not sure if you've come across his stuff, but basically what he says is that we have an innate, his words exactly, receptivity to believing in God. In 2011, the Oxford Anthropological Society, they'd done a huge study of 32,000 children. And what they found was that children innately and intuitively, instinctively have a belief of a higher power of some sorts.
We humans are obsessed with purpose. It seems perfectly natural when we're presented with an object to say, what's it for? It starts in childhood. The psychologist Deborah Kellerman has investigated this very interestingly with children, offering them a question like, why do you think these rocks are pointy? Is it because of some geological explanation, geological cause, or is it so that animals could scratch on them when they get itchy? And below a certain age, I think it's about 6, most children answer with the teleological answer with the purpose question. Yes, they're pointy so that animals can scratch on them when they get itchy. Children then mostly grow out of that purposive way of looking at the world. but not apparently everybody. In medieval times, I've got to try to work this. Who's good with iPads? I'm trying to get... Oh, here we are. Okay. In medieval times, divines would look at living things and see purpose for human benefit in them. In the 19th century, the Reverend William Paley thought that the louse was an indispensable incentive to cleanliness. Savage beasts, according to an Elizabethan bishop, fostered human courage and provided useful training for war. Horseflies, for an 18th century writer, were created so that men should exercise their wits and industry to guard themselves against them. Lobsters were given hard shells so that before eating them we could benefit from the improving exercise of cracking their claws. Another medieval writer thought that weeds were there to benefit us. It's so good for our spirit to have to work hard pulling them up. Now, it's not difficult to see that such people would also have found purpose in the physical world, in mountains. What's the purpose of a mountain? What's the purpose of a stream? We humans love to see purpose everywhere.
No, Richard, I disagree with you in that. Not all idiots can understand that mountains haven't got a purpose. Allah, for example, thinks mountains have a purpose, to keep Earth steady. So, no all idiots understand that mountains haven't got purpose. But saying that humans have an innate disposition to believe in God, so what? Evolution explains that. Okay, we humans are wired by evolution to see agency everywhere. Because if we didn't see agency everywhere, we wouldn't survive. For example, if the primitive humans in Africa, in the savannah, watched something move in the woods and said, it's just the wind, these humans died out. So humans have an innate disposition, all animals in fact, have an innate disposition to see agency everywhere in order to be always in alert for predators. That's the reason, my friend, if something moves in your feet, you immediately say, snake, 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 snake. Why that happens? You never say, it's just the wind. If something moves in your feet, you immediately think, snake, 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 snake. Okay, that phenomenon is the God gene. In other words, you see agency everywhere. The same way you saw agency in the universe. That's not fitra. That's a very easily explainable phenomenon called the God gene. Okay, and it applies to all animals. So unless your God put fitra to every other animal, that's not the true explanation of why humans tend to believe in God.
Now, they are born with that belief. And in fact, in one of the papers in Justin Barrett's book, he literally mentions the fitra, or the Islamic theological concept of an instinct in believing in God.
What's his last name?
Barrett.
How do you spell that?
I think RTT, I believe.
Justin Barrett. Okay, that's useful. Yeah, well, it just strikes me that you see, the problem with debating people like Richard Dawkins about the existence of God is that he will formulate the argument in propositional terms and then force the person, so to speak. I don't imply any malice on his part, but as soon as you accept that the battle is to be won on propositional grounds, you've already accepted a certain definition of God. And I think you lose the argument instantly. I think the argument for instinct, something like that, is much more powerful. Because one of the things I'm led to wonder when you laid out your argument is, well, what purpose does belief in God serve, or your faith in God, let's say? And I think belief, see, it's also really interesting to try to distinguish between belief in something and faith in something. Like if you imagine you have faith in the good. And so how do you demonstrate that? Well, you believe that good is more powerful than evil. You believe that you should act in a manner that's appropriate to the good, and so then you act that way, and that's the faith. The faith is demonstrated in the actions.
Yes,
but it's not
we agree with
exactly it's not exactly propositional. And partly because I would say, if you look at good and evil, for example, it's not that easy to make the case that good is more dominant or more powerful than evil, all things considered, in human affairs. Now, I think it is, but you know what I mean? You can't make a compelling propositional case that that's absolutely true, but you can reflect your faith in your actions.
My colleague Peter Atkins, whose works I recommend to you, I think that it's high time that a scientist won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and Peter Atkins would be my nominee for that. He was once invited to give a lecture in Windsor Castle, which, as you know, is one of the homes of the British monarch. And at the end of his lecture, Prince Philip said, "You scientists are awfully good at answering the how questions, but what about the why question?" And Peter Atkins said, "Sir, the why question is just a silly question."
That's right. The why questions are just silly questions when it comes to cosmology. Why is that? Exactly because the universe is not underlined by a consciousness. So, in an absolute sense, we don't ought to do anything. There is no good and bad in an absolute sense. Exactly because the universe doesn't operate with consciousness. It operates with gravity and nuclear forces and electromagnetism, let's say. So let me be correct about that. It's gravity, the two nuclear forces, and electromagnetism, I think. Anyway, but the point remains. Consciousness has nothing to do with the universe, how the universe operates. Consciousness is, we humans evolved consciousness, and after we evolved consciousness, for us, there are objective things that we ought to do. But we don't ought to do them in an absolute sense. We ought to do them objectively, with the fixed perspective in the human condition. So, we have of objectivity in good and bad, but relating to the fixed point of reference of the human condition. Okay. So what was the question again? Jordan Peterson said something about, I kind of forgot. Okay, let's continue, and I will continue.
You see, the problem with debating people like Richard Dawkins about the existence of God is that he will formulate the argument in propositional terms and then force the person, so to speak. I don't imply any malice on his part, but as soon as you accept that the battle is to be won on propositional grounds, you've already accepted a certain definition of God. And I think you lose the argument instantly. I think the argument for instinct, something like that, is much more powerful. Because one of the things I'm led to wonder when you laid out your argument is, well, what purpose does belief in God serve, or your faith in God, let's say? And I think belief, see...
No, sorry. Okay. Jordan Peterson. Religion has adaptive benefit. In other words, even if it's not true, it might help the lives of people. Because even if religion is not actually true, the effect of religion in human psychology and sociology and even physiology, if you assume evolution, and even physiology, is real, even if religion is not real. So in that sense, religion might have adaptive benefit that has no bearing whether religion is true. That's the first thing. Then you said atheists use propositional, they make propositional argument. No, they don't. In fact, religious people make propositional arguments. That's why you have something which is very popular in apologetics, presuppositional apologetics. You make deductive arguments. Where did you see any atheists make deductive arguments? Where did you see that? All the deductive arguments I see is from religious people. The cosmological argument are deductive. They make propositions. They presuppose their worldview to prove their worldview. Okay, so where did you see any atheists make propositions? I haven't seen any. So in other words, what he means is that atheists presuppose methodological naturalism in order to disprove God. No, they don't presuppose anything. We don't have evidence for the supernatural. So atheists just say that as long as we don't have evidence, we won't believe things that are not substantiated or having good reasons. Okay, so you imply some kind of scientism, that atheists make science into overstate the truth-bearing ability of science to not accept religion, when in fact that's the complete opposite is going on. Religious people overstate the truth-bearing ability of the metaphysical when we don't have any evidence for the metaphysical. Moreover, religious people like you, Jordan Peterson, you make instrumental arguments. In other words, because religion has adaptive benefit, therefore we should accept religion as true. So, okay, you said something that in a small sense apply to atheists, but in a larger sense apply to religious people. Religious people make propositions and deductive arguments and claim absolute certainty. It's not atheists that are doing that. Anyway, guys, I will stop this video here and I will have a second part responding to the rest conversation, which is more interesting. That was, so far it was atheist-theist debate. I think further on there will be the social aspect. Thank you very much.